Welcome back to One True Podcast, a June edition. Zach, it's been a minute since we gathered on the pod.
It's good to be back. I mean, college sports never sleeps. So, yeah, even if we took a little break, lots has happened.
Yes, and we do plan to do this a little more often going forward, and have a chance to talk. There's plenty to talk about. There's no question about that. So let's kind of get into that a little bit. So obviously, you had last Friday the antitrust lawsuit, the House settlement that finally came down after a good while. Um, this is a pretty big deal, a decision that figures to have wide-ranging ramifications across college sports, not just, for Baylor, but for everyone. What were kind of your initial takeaways?
Yeah, that's a loaded question because like that thing is like the whole house settlement and this whole thing. Like when I got into sports writing, I really liked, touchdowns and quarterbacks and field goals and all that fun stuff. I didn't think I'd get into the Lego mumbo jumbo that we're in now, but here we are. Um, Overall, I think it's kind of needed because whether you're Sawyer Robertson or Nigel Kennedy or Nico Amaliava or whoever, having six-figure deals, NIL deals, is not a sustainable model moving forward. And so, what I think this does provide some guardrails, excuse me. It just like puts a little bit of a cap, to use a lack of a better word, because it kind of is a salary cap.
Mm.
Um, on things moving forward, at least until things expire and TV contracts are up. But that's another can of words. But in the interim, right now, I think it's a good thing. I think it really like we like college sports because it's kind of stupid and kind of crazy, but they're kids. And I think this does a good job of kind of threading the needle between, all right, they deserve to be paid because they bring in a lot of money while also maintaining that kind of youthful vigor that college sports has. And so, yeah, it's been a lot. There's a lot of just minutia that can get lost in things, but overall, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's a good thing for college sports moving forward.
You mentioned guardrails, and when you said that, were you the one? Uh, I've had so many different conversations who compared it to bumpers in bowling. Uh,
That's a
somebody
good. That's a good one. I mean,
somebody told me that, and I like that. And I'll also say this. So growing up, whenever I would go bowling, I don't like for years. I don't ever remember seeing bumpers. Like that wasn't until I was older, and and I remember the first time I saw them, I was like, "What?" Like this makes it really easy.
right.
Like how could you miss? You're supposed to have the threat of the gutter, but anyway, where I'm going with that. Um, I think for a lot of us that have been around in college sports a while, we look at some stuff like this and we go, "What?" Like it's hard, it's hard to wrap our brains around sometimes, but it's the way it's going, and I do think it, like you said, at least presents some guidelines. Scott Drew said the other day, we just want to know the rules and what everybody's working off of.
But I at the same time, like that's the optimistic tack of it. But the pessimistic side of things, like I am worried that it's just going to, bring back kind of the under the table deal because now any NIL deal over $600 is going to a clearinghouse, and so like that's I think problematic because it's like a lot of these players are going to want more than $600 correctly, and so it's like there's a lot more issues that are going to come up that we are going to find out one way or another. There's the Title IX piece of this. Like there are so many more like things that I don't even know if the NCAA knows what's around the corner because no one knows because it hasn't happened yet. So,
Mm.
as much as I think it is a overwhelmingly good thing, I still have tons of questions that really can't be answered until they actually happen.
Maybe the NCAA felt like, we just don't have that much to do anymore. Let's take some of it back.
They have enough problems. Like it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah, for sure. So obviously, football, men's basketball, women's basketball bring in, the revenue in college sports.
Mhm.
And I would say in that order. Um, and in this new model, they will also be getting the lion's share of the revenue, 95%, which leaves, 5% for everyone else. How do you feel like these other sports are going to be impacted?
Well, I mean, I think you're going to see a much more like regional, like when it comes to like softball and baseball, like you're going to see, and volleyball even, like you're going to see a much more regional schedule. Like
Hmm.
certainly teams are going to continue to play whoever's in their conference, but like a non-conference tournament for the softball team in California that sends them there for a week, probably not going to happen. You're going to go to College Station if you're Baylor. I think Baylor in Texas playing in all the sports makes a lot of sense. So I just think there are ways where, as long as you come in under budget, I don't really that the record is almost secondary, and I think that's unfortunate for those sports. Um, and I don't know if there's one of those sports, maybe A&T at Baylor, that like on a national stage like is super relevant. And how we can argue how nationally relevant A&T is, but national championships are national championships. So, it's unfortunate, but I think that's the way it is. And I don't know if that really changes much in terms of scheduling and all that fun stuff. So, like you said, I mean, football, men's and women's basketball, those are the money makers. And whether there's a house settlement or not, I don't know how much that's changing.
Here's what I think will change in the very immediate term. We've already heard some rumblings of this at Baylor of some coaching positions at some of those other sports getting eliminated. I think as coaching staffs have grown and grown and grown over the years, um, those sports benefited from having some extra coaches. Well, I think now, that's going to be one of those budget line items that gets, Xed, um, which is
But
unfortunate for those people. Uh, but if it keeps the sport around,
right.
that's the upshot. That's the upside because that's the thing I fear the most as a fan of a lot of those sports. I would really hate to see them go away.
And I guess the more I read about the house settlement and college athletics moving forward, I'm not the more I read about it, the less I'm concerned about sports getting cut. I still think or even knocked down to club level. I just think there is enough room in the budget for them to exist. Now, you know, how successful they are going, like what is the level of success you want? If you want the baseball team to be a perennial college World Series team, like I don't think they can do that with less than 5% of the budget. But if you want them to exist and maybe every once in a while have a Big 12 championship season, like they can do that probably. So it's just like I'm not worried about sports getting cut, whether that's equestrian or whatever. But I just think we have to shift our expectations, or fans shift their expectations on what is success, which is
Yeah,
going to take a little bit.
sure. Well, there'll be a lot more of that to unpack, and I'm certain that we'll talk more about all those changes that are coming. But let's talk some football. So I mean, obviously, again, we haven't podcasted since spring football. Um, And so, you got a chance to be out there on the regular and do interviews and stuff. Um, and I know you're a big podcast listener
all the time.
of college football. You're pretty plugged in. So outside, I don't know if there's anybody else, but outside of a Phil Steele prediction of Baylor as number 13 in the country, and I think tied for the Big 12 lead, I would say Dave Aranda's team has mostly flown under the radar um, in college football talk and predictions. This offseason. I contend that's a pretty good place for Baylor to be. What do you think?
Yeah, not aside from Phil Steele, I think Lindy's, I don't know if that's out yet, but they're going to be in the top 25 when that preview magazine comes out. Um, no one is talking about Baylor. Nobody is. And I don't know. I think that's twofold. I think, well, threefold really. One, I don't think Baylor got any like big name recruit. Nico Imaliava did not transfer to Baylor. Even if you look at like Utah, their new quarterback Dylan Dampier, he had a really good year and he transferred in, and now he thinks they think he can be, maybe a diet Cam Rising and take Utah back to the mountaintop. So like even when it's a Big 12 discussion, Baylor is never mentioned. And I think that's, you know, I part of that, I kind of think that's a Dave Aranda thing just because he's an introvert and he doesn't like to do a lot of marketing of his programs, where I can think of other programs in the state, Texas Tech and Joey McGuire, who do a lot of marketing, depending on how much success they have. I don't want to throw a shot at Chad Conine, but how many, uh, you know, championships have whatever. We're getting down the weeds here. Um, so I think you're absolutely right that it's a good thing for Baylor to be kind of under the radar. They're not going to be under the radar for long though, because you look at the first four games of the season. Auburn, who's going to like hopefully, or they want to, be in the SEC title hunt. Whether they will or not is to be seen. And then the your next three games are against teams that are or were in the college football playoff. So if no one's talking about Baylor right now, probably for the best, because Sawyer Robertson, Bryson, there's a lot to like about Baylor that I'm sure we're going to get into later down the road. But after the first month of the season, everybody's going to be talking about Baylor, especially if they do what they think they can. So
Hmm. Obviously, a big key will be improving defensively across the board. I think, that potential is there for sure.
mm,
But like you said, you got to like a lot of the pieces that Baylor has coming back, including an established quarterback and a running back that, obviously tore it up last year. The receiving room looks pretty deep. And then O-line, what? How many are they returning?
four or five
Four or five.
starters.
Yeah. So,
They were a top 10 O line last year, and four or five of them are coming back. Like, it's pretty good. And
yeah.
the replacement guy was basically the sixth starter last year. So that offense, I have no doubt in my mind that offense is going to, bar an injury, be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah.
Defense, there's a lot more question marks, but you figure Dave Aranda in year two of calling things and basically being the defensive coordinator. I think in the transfer portal, they filled the holes they needed to on the defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, I absolutely think that I know I'm an optimist, but there is reason for optimism for all sides of the ball, both
Yeah.
sides of the ball.
Not to, you know, bring everybody down, but they did deal with a tragedy this offseason, the death of Alex Foster. Um, have you heard anything? I assume they will do something to recognize him on their uniforms or their helmets or something like that.
I haven't heard or seen anything, but I agree with you. I imagine they will have some sort of um, insignia remembering
Hmm.
him this year.
Yeah, that's a tragic deal for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, so let's turn the page to basketball. Obviously, it was a big off season for both Scott Drew and Nicki Collen and their teams. Um, you know, we got a chance to talk to them just this week about kind of all their moves and stuff. Um, what is your kind of like way too early prediction on how Drew's team, Nicki's team, how they're going to fare next year?
Oh, well, I mean, Scott Drew, and I know you wrote this, like having complete roster to 0.0% of his roster coming back. Like that is
It's insane.
unprecedented.
It's insane.
That's ridiculous. But like I trust Scott Drew. Like I think that the floor with him is the roof. Like he might maybe he won't have a national championship winning team, but like I trust him that with a bunch of all new guys, like he's going to have a competitive, winning squad, and I trust that he and the coaching staff can do that. I mean, what you know him way better. What do you think?
So I agree. I obviously, a lot of times the moves you make are based off of, the way the previous season went and what you lacked that year. And I think very much so that's the case with this group. Um, they went out looking for two big things most of all, and that was, we got to get deeper and we got to get longer. And I think they have achieved both of those things. To me, they've got six guys that have averaged double figures scoring in college already. Plus, I think Tunde, they're a five-star McDonald's All-American. I think he's probably good for a double figure scoring average. He may end up being your leading scorer. Um, Probably the next one and done guy. But uh and then the length, we saw that really hurt Baylor when Josh Ojonwuna went down with his ACL injury. They just, they had to slide Norchad into the five spot and kind of play undersized. And I thought they sort of maximized, what they could do with that smaller group, smaller being smaller, shorter, and smaller bench. Uh, but I just think now they're a little bit deeper and certainly longer. They have two 6'10" guys and a 7-footer. Um, so that's good. And I just feel like they didn't really go after any sort of like big fish in the
Mhm.
transfer portal. That's something I wrote about, but um, I think they got a bunch of guys who will be hungry to like prove themselves and guys that are coming from Omaha and High Point and Wyoming and like they're going to be excited to play in the Big 12 and
Mhm.
excited to play in the Foster Pavilion. Like this is, they probably walk around that locker room, which we've gotten a chance to do and go, holy crap, there's a
Pretty
wall of
nice.
shoes. What are you talking about? Like it's insane. It's that Power Five money that Baylor brings in. It's leads to some glitzy stuff. So yes, I agree with you. I think they'll be a little bit under the radar. But again, much like the football team, I'm not sure that's a bad place to be. Maybe whereas last year they started higher in the rankings and sort of, eventually dropped out. Maybe
Mhm.
this year they have a chance to climb. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, and to kind of bring it full circle with the house settlement and salary cap and all that, like really one thing that like thinking of Jeremy Roach and Norchad Omier last year, like I think Omier obviously Norchad worked out pretty good, but Roach was kind of, for what they allegedly paid,
Hmm.
probably wasn't what you wanted. And really, in this new day and age of college football and basketball, you really can't miss on your transfers. And so
Hmm.
to, to get a bunch of maybe less heralded, probably cheaper guys, that's probably a good strategy for Baylor and to kind of build them up. So I think
Yeah.
I agree. I think they're in for some good stuff this year.
Yeah. It's almost like, would you rather have you know, 2A minus guys or five
Hmm.
B plus guys,
Right,
or
right.
it's kind of one of those. I mean,
But then you got an
um,
A plus coach, which
right,
I think is
and
the
a an A plus coach who has a history and probably misses this to a certain extent of developing guys. Like that
yeah,
was Scott Drew's MO forever was, taking guys like Corey Jefferson and Torian Prince and guys like that and guys that were sort of unheralded prospects and letting those guys build into NBA prospects. Um, Obviously Tunde is going to come in here and he's going to be an NBA guy right off the bat, but could JJ White, could Caden Powell, could Obi
mhm.
Agbum, or I don't know how to say all these guys' names yet. uh, could they develop into like NBA type guys? We'll see. And I think those kind of things are fun for Scott. And I do like the fact that he's got a few guys on the roster that you expect to be here more than one season.
Right.
And that'll be nice because 0.0% is not ideal.
Ridiculous,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
How about
Uh,
Nicki and her team? She also has some transfers coming in, but not quite as drastic as Scott.
I would say that they are not as under the radar as Scott. I think I saw a poll today and they were 11th in the country. So definitely not under the radar. But I think when you've got players like Dariana Little played Bugs, Bella Fauntleroy, who are, as she was talking about going into their fourth year at the team at a single school, and not only that, but like they've been pretty much starters the entire time, and or key players at the very least. And so like that's a pretty good base to build on. And so like you bring in Talia Scott from Auburn, who was just an otherworld. She was a McDonald's All-American. She was kind of bounced around a little bit. She got hurt last year, so she's coming off of an injury. Yu Ting Dang, another transfer from Auburn, who uh, apparently came from China, did not speak English, got to know the Auburn coach who is now on the Baylor staff and has this potential, was a very highly rated prospect, but really hasn't had the chance to prove it. But she's only a sophomore, so she's got plenty of time to do it. So I think there's again, I think there's a floor with Nicki and Bugs and Bella. Now, how far they can go, you know, she was very honest the other day when we were talking about injuries and players coming back from injury. Jana Van Geitenbeek was a huge part of that run to the Sweet 16 a couple years ago. And like I think a third or second or third game of this last season, she tore ACL. So she's working her way back from a torn ACL. And like another fourth year player at Baylor, but like how healthy is she going to be at least to start out? And so I think there are plenty of question marks for Baylor, but again, I think there's a floor. Um, and I think losing someone like Sarah Andrews, who is like Miss Baylor, right? Like she holds all these records in terms of games played and three pointers made. Nicki had been putting her on the starting lineup every day since she's been here, and now she's not. What does that do? You lose Aaronette Von Lay, who, as we saw towards the end of the last season, really was just she was the superstar that Baylor needed. And so who fills her shoes? I don't know if Kyla Abraham can do that. I don't know. So like I've said it before, like there's a floor, and they could be a Final Four team, but they're not going to suck. I'll say that much.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, it's my second favorite part of Nikki's press conference the other day. I say second favorite because my favorite part, of course, was when we were talking pickup ball. But
I've
my
got I've got the videos from her in Portland. Like she was behind the 3-point line. She was just like
nice.
letting them fly, man. She did not miss one. So I believe her when she says she won't lose a
I
shooting
had a day
contest.
like that last week in pickup ball, and then yesterday I played, and it was the exact opposite. Uh, so the second favorite part is when she was talking about what a basketball nerd she is. And I too am a basketball nerd. but I would say in a very different way than Nicki. Like I write columns about like the top buzzer beaters in March Madness history. And if you asked me like right off the top of my head, like what are the top 10 dunks in NBA history, I would just geek out over that. Like I would be like sitting here going, yeah, that sounds fun. Let's talk about that. Uh, Nikki is an X's and O's basketball nerd. She like geeks out talking about, middle ball screens and, hedging and uh,
Horns actions, like
yeah, yeah, exactly. Horns action. She is down in the weeds on that stuff. But where I'm going with that is, I think much like I said with Scott and developing players, I think um, Nikki has a good way of getting the most out of her girls. Of uh, getting players ready for the next level WNBA, and um, so I think that makes her an attractive coach to come play for if you're a recruit or a transfer out there. So yeah, I think it shapes up as a pretty promising year on both sides. I think for Baylor.
and to that one more point on the women's team, like to that point, like this team just from a roster, the women's team from a roster perspective looks very different from last year's team. And to Nikki's credit, like her liking the X's and O's and doing all that, like they're not going to play the same way they played last year. And I think she's set up for success in that realm because of how she likes to coach and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yep. Well, obviously, football will be here before we know it. You and I will be at like Big 12 Media Days next month. I'm sure, we'll have a lot to talk about. Let's do this again next week. What do you say?
Let's do it. Yeah. I'm sure there's always something.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. See you, bud.
So yeah.